The pre-dawn air in Anchorage bit through Emma Chen's pink winter jacket as she skipped across the tarmac, her small boots crunching on frost-covered concrete. Above her, the Alaskan sky was transforming from deep purple to soft orange, the kind of sunrise that painted the snow-capped mountains in shades of gold. At 7 years old, Emma had seen this view more times than most adults ever would, and it never got old. "Slow down, princess," her father called out, his voice warm with affection despite the 5 a.m. wake-up call. Mark Chen, a weathered bush pilot with 15 years of experience threading through Alaska's unforgiving skis, carried 2 thermoses of hot chocolate and a worn leather flight bag that had been with him since his Air Force days. Emma spun around, her black ponytail whipping through the frozen air. "Come on, Dad. Sarah's already here." She pointed to the Cessna 207, where co-pilot Sarah Thompson was conducting the pre-flight inspection, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid morning. This was Emma's world, the smell of aviation fuel mixing with crisp mountain air, the distant rumble of engines warming up, the satisfying click of seatbelts, and the organized chaos of instrument panels. While other kids her age were obsessed with tablets and cartoons, Emma Chen lived for these flights. Spring break meant most of her classmates were heading to Disneyland or visiting grandparents. Emma was headed to a remote research station 300 miles into the Alaskan wilderness, and she couldn't be happier. "Morning, little co-pilot," Sarah greeted, ruffling Emma's hair as she approached. Sarah Thompson, 32, had been flying with Mark for 3 years. She was the cool aunt Emma never had, always sneaking her extra cookies, teaching her aviation terms that made Mark roll his eyes, letting her hold the yoke during straight-hand-level flight when Mark wasn't looking. "Can I do the walk-around with you?" Emma asked, eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Already done, kiddo, but you can double-check my work." Sarah handed her a clipboard, and Emma solemnly began circling the aircraft, pretending to inspect the wings and tail with exaggerated professionalism that made both adults smile. Mark loaded their supplies into the cargo hold, equipment for the research station, Emma's overstuffed backpack, because she might need 12 books for a 3-day trip, and a cooler packed by Emma's mother with enough snacks to feed an army. Linda Chen had kissed her daughter's forehead that morning with the practiced calm of a woman married to a pilot, but Mark had seen the familiar worry in her eyes. She never said it aloud, but he knew. Every flight carried risk. "All clear," Emma announced, handing the clipboard back to Sarah with a crisp salute. "Then let's get this bird in the air," Mark said, lifting Emma up to the cabin door. She scrambled inside, immediately claiming her favorite spot, the jump seat directly behind the pilot's chair, where she had a perfect view of everything. The Cessna 207 wasn't glamorous. The interior was functional, worn in places, with that distinctive small plane smell of old leather and mechanical efficiency. But to Emma, it was a magic carpet. She buckled herself in with practiced efficiency, arranging her coloring books and a bag of gummy bears within easy reach. Mark settled into the pilot's seat, and his transformation was immediate. The playful father became the focused professional, hands moving with automatic precision through the startup checklist. Sarah mirrored his movements from the co-pilot's seat, their coordination the result of hundreds of flights together. Anchorage ground, Cessna 27 Bravo Charlie, ready to taxi from the north ramp. Mark spoke into his headset, his voice taking on that distinctive pilot cadence, clear, calm, authoritative. Emma listened to the radio chatter, understanding about half of it, fascinated by all of it. She'd been flying with her father since she was 3 months old, strapped into a car seat in the back while Mark flew supply runs. By age 5, she could identify most of the instruments. By 6, she understood basic flight concepts that would confuse many adults. By 7, she was the youngest person Mark knew who could explain the difference between indicated and true airspeed. "You warm enough back there, Em?" Sarah asked, glancing over her shoulder as they taxied toward the runway. "Yep, can we go over the mountains today instead of around them?" Mark chuckled. Weather's perfect for it. Might even see some dull sheep if you keep your eyes sharp. The engine's rumble increased to a roar as they reached the runway threshold. Emma gripped her armrests, feeling the familiar thrill as her father pushed the throttle forward. The Cessna surged ahead, the white centerline blurring beneath them, the vibration of wheels on pavement thrumming through her body. Then, the magical moment she lived for, the rumbling stopped, the nose lifted, and they were flying. Alaska spread beneath them like a geography lesson come to life. Emma pressed her face to the window, watching Anchorage shrink into a toy city, the Cook Inlet gleaming like hammered silver in the early light. The mountains rose to meet them, massive and indifferent, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "Climbing through 5,000, Sarah announced. Mark leveled off briefly, then continued their ascent. "Emma, see those peaks ahead? We'll cruise at 11,000 feet today, well above them. Should be smooth sailing." Emma nodded, already absorbed in her coloring book, a purple crayon working on what appeared to be a very elaborate dragon. This was her routine. Watch the takeoff, color for a while, ask her dad a million questions, maybe nap if the flight was long enough. "You know what I love about this job," Sarah said, accepting a thermos of hot chocolate from Mark. "Most people spend their Monday mornings in traffic. We get this." She gestured to the windscreen, where the Alaskan range stretched endlessly, peaks catching the sunrise, glaciers reflecting light like scattered diamonds. It was the kind of view that made you believe in something bigger than yourself. 11,000 feet leveling off, Mark announced, trimming the aircraft. The Cessna settled into its cruise, the engine finding its rhythm. Everything was perfect, textbook conditions, unlimited visibility, not even a hint of turbulence. Emma looked up from her coloring. "Dad, when I grow up, can I fly planes like you?" Mark met her eyes in the reflection of the instrument panel, his expression soft. "Princess, you can be anything you want, but yeah, I think you'd make one hell of a pilot." "Language," Sarah teased. "One heck of a pilot," Mark corrected with a grin. Emma returned to her coloring, satisfied. Behind her, the cabin pressure warning light, a small orange indicator no bigger than a dime, flickered once in the morning sun. It stayed lit for exactly 1.3 seconds before going dark again. Nobody noticed. Outside, the mountains scrolled past in majestic silence. Inside, a father and daughter shared hot chocolate while the co-pilot hummed along to a song on her headset. It was an ordinary moment, peaceful and unremarkable, the kind that, in retrospect, you wish you could freeze and hold onto forever. The clock on the instrument panel read 6:47 a.m. In 8 minutes, everything would change. The pressurization system failure began with something so small it was almost philosophical, a rubber seal, no thicker than a pencil, that had degraded over thousands of flight hours. In the unpressurized hell of 11,000 feet, where air pressure is 30% lower than at sea level, that tiny seal was all that stood between the crew and oxygen starvation. At 6:51 a.m. it gave up. There was no explosion, no alarm, no dramatic warning, just a microscopic hiss of air escaping from the cabin, a sound completely swallowed by the engine's steady drone. The cabin pressure began dropping, slowly at first, then faster. The pressurization gauge should have screamed a warning, but a corroded wire connection caused the system to report everything as normal. Mark Chen continued flying, completely unaware that his airplane had just become a death trap. "So I told Jenkins that if he wanted the supply run done by Tuesday, he'd have to pay the rush fee," Mark was saying, finishing a story about a difficult client. "And he actually tried to negotiate. In Alaska, where else is he going to find a pilot willing to?" He paused mid-sentence, momentarily losing his train of thought. "Where was I?" "Rush fee," Sarah prompted, but her voice sounded distant, even to her own ears. She blinked hard. The instrument panel seemed slightly blurry, like she was looking at it through water. "Right, yeah, rush fee. Mark shook his head, trying to clear the sudden fog in his brain. Sorry, I'm a little off this morning. Linda kept me up late watching some documentary about penguins. Penguins, Sarah, until midnight. Sarah laughed, but it came out strange, too loud, then trailing off. That's funny. She pressed her fingers against her temples. A dull headache was building behind her eyes, the kind that made her want to close them and rest, just for a moment. The Cessna flew on, stable and steady at 11,000 feet. Outside, the world was crystalline perfection. Endless blue sky, white mountains, air so clear you could see for 100 miles. Inside, invisible and odorless, the oxygen content was dropping to dangerous levels. Hypoxia is a liar. It's a thief that steals your judgment before you even know you're being robbed. The human brain, that marvel of evolution, requires constant oxygen to function. Starve it even slightly, and the first thing to go is your ability to recognize that anything is wrong. Pilots call it the gentle killer because it feels almost pleasant. A floating sensation, mild euphoria, the sense that everything is just fine even as you're dying. At 6:53 a.m., the effective cabin altitude had risen to 14,000 feet. Mark and Sarah were now functioning with the oxygen levels found on a moderate mountain peak. Their blood oxygen saturation, normally 98%, had dropped to 85%. "Dad," Emma's voice came from behind them. "Can I have the blue crayon?" Mark turned to look at her, and the simple motion made his head spin. What, princess?" "The blue crayon. It's in your flight bag." He stared at her for a moment, processing the words as if they were in a foreign language. "Oh, yeah, blue." He made no move to get it. Emma waited, then shrugged and went back to her purple dragon, using red instead. Adults were weird sometimes. Sarah's fingers moved across the control panel, but her movements were becoming sluggish, imprecise. She was supposed to be monitoring something. What was it? The fuel? No, they'd checked that. The heading? They were on course. Everything was fine. Everything was absolutely, perfectly fine. Except it wasn't. "I feel weird," Sarah mumbled, the words thick in her mouth. Her lips were starting to tingle, a pins and needles sensation that would have alarmed her if her brain was functioning normally. But the oxygen-starved neurons firing in her head were telling her this was normal, nothing to worry about. Maybe she just needed some water. Mark agreed. His own vision was tunneling now, the edges of his sight growing dark, probably just tired early morning. "Yeah," Sarah's head felt heavy, like it was filled with wet sand. She let it drop back against the headrest. "Just need to close my eyes for a second." "Don't fall asleep on me, Thompson," Mark said, but his voice had lost its edge of humor. The words came out flat, automated. "Not sleeping, just resting." At 6:55 a.m., the cabin altitude reached 16,000 feet. Blood oxygen saturation, 75%. The human brain begins significant impairment at 85%. At 75%, coherent thought becomes nearly impossible. Mark's hand slipped off the yoke. He looked at it, his own hand, as if it belonged to someone else. Why was it shaking? He tried to grip the controls again, but his fingers wouldn't obey properly. They felt distant, disconnected. A small, rational part of his brain, the tiny piece still receiving enough oxygen to function, whispered that something was catastrophically wrong. But that whisper was drowned out by the overwhelming sense of calm. He felt good, relaxed, like he could just drift off to sleep right here, right now. His training had covered hypoxia. Hours of classroom instruction, time in altitude chambers where they let you feel the symptoms in a controlled environment. He'd been taught to recognize the signs: confusion, euphoria, impaired judgment, blue lips, tingling extremities. But hypoxia doesn't care about training. It doesn't care that you know the symptoms, because the first symptom is the inability to recognize the symptoms. Mark's head began to droop. "Sarah," he slurred, "feel funny." Sarah didn't answer. Her eyes had closed, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her normally healthy complexion had taken on a grayish-blue tint, her lips the color of a faded bruise. "Sarah," Mark tried again, but the word came out as barely a whisper. Behind them, Emma was humming to herself, lost in her coloring. She felt a little dizzy, a little strange, but she was smaller, sitting lower in the cabin where slightly more oxygen pooled. Her young body was fighting the hypoxia harder than the adults, buying her precious extra minutes of consciousness. At 6:56 a.m., Mark Chen's eyes rolled back in his head. His body went limp, slumping forward against the control yoke. The sudden weight pushed the yoke forward and the Cessna's nose dipped down. Sarah was already unconscious, her head lolled to the side, mouth slightly open. The aircraft, now pilotless, began its descent. The altimeter needle started unwinding. 10,900 feet, 10,800 feet, 10,700 feet. Emma looked up from her coloring book, holding her purple crayon. "Dad, are we landing already?" No answer. The mountains below were getting closer, their snow-covered peaks rising to meet the falling plane. The engine hummed its steady song, oblivious to the crisis. The radio crackled with distant chatter from other aircraft, pilots checking in with air traffic control, normal conversations on a normal Monday morning. Inside the Cessna, 2 adults lay unconscious, their brains shutting down from oxygen starvation. And in the back, a 7-year-old girl was about to discover that her entire life had been preparation for the next 30 minutes. She just didn't know it yet. The clock read 6:57 a.m. Emma put down her crayon and called out again, "Daddy." "Silence, Daddy." Emma's voice echoed in the small cabin, swallowed by the engine's monotonous drone. She waited for her father's usual response, "Yes, Princess," or "What's up, kiddo?" Instead, she got nothing. Just the steady hum of the propeller and an unusual silence that made her stomach feel tight. She leaned forward in her jump seat, craning her neck to see into the cockpit. Her father's shoulders were slumped in an odd way, his head pressed against the instrument panel at an angle that looked uncomfortable. Sarah was tilted sideways, her face turned toward the window, completely still. "Dad, are you sleeping?" Emma unbuckled her seatbelt with practiced ease, the same motion she'd done hundreds of times, but this time felt different. This time her fingers trembled. She stepped into the narrow space between the seats, her small frame allowing her to squeeze through the gap. "Daddy, wake up. You're going to get a sore neck." She placed her hand on his shoulder and shook gently. "Nothing." She shook harder. "Dad, wake up." Mark's head lolled slightly with the movement, but his eyes remained closed. His skin looked wrong, not the healthy tan she was used to, but grayish, waxy. His lips had a bluish tint that made Emma think of the frozen blueberries her mom put in smoothies. Real fear bloomed in Emma's chest, cold and sharp. "Daddy," she shook him with both hands now, panic rising in her throat. "Please wake up, please." Sarah was worse. When Emma touched her arm, it was completely limp, dead weight. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths that whistled slightly. A thin line of drool had escaped the corner of her mouth. "Sarah, Miss Sarah, please," Emma's voice cracked. She was 7 years old, alone at 11,000 feet, and the 2 adults responsible for keeping her alive were unconscious. The reality crashed over her like ice water. That's when she noticed the instruments. Even in her panic, years of flying with her father had ingrained certain images in her mind. The artificial horizon, the little airplane symbol that showed which way was up, was tilted wrong. The nose was pointing down, and the altimeter, that round gauge with numbers that showed how high they were, was doing something it should never do during cruise flight. It was going backward. 10,600 feet. Emma had asked her father once what would happen if a plane just kept going down. He'd explained it simply. Eventually, you meet the ground, and if you meet it too fast, bad things happen. He'd said it with a smile, in that way adults explain scary things to kids without making them too scary. There was nothing unscary about watching those numbers spin down now. 10,500 feet. Emma's breath came in short gasps. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it pounding in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to cry, to curl up in a ball, to close her eyes and wait for her daddy to fix this like he fixed everything. But her daddy wasn't going to fix this. Because her daddy was asleep. Or the thought crept into her mind like a monster under the bed. Or maybe he was dead. No, Emma whispered. No, 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 he's not dead. He's just sleeping. He's just sleeping and he'll wake up and everything will be fine. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. This wasn't normal sleep. People who were sleeping woke up when you shook them and yelled. People who were sleeping didn't look gray and blue and wrong. 10,400 feet. Through the windscreen, the mountains filled more of the view than they should. Jagged peaks of rock and ice that looked beautiful from a safe distance but were deadly up close. Emma had seen plane wrecks before, twisted metal scattered across mountainsides, dark scars in the snow. Her father had pointed them out during flights, using them as teaching moments. See that, Em? That's what happens when you don't respect the mountains. She was going to become one of those scars. A sound escaped her throat, half sob, half whimper. Tears blurred her vision, but she couldn't look away from the altimeter. The numbers kept dropping, hypnotic and terrible. 10,300 feet. Her coloring book lay open on her seat, the purple dragon half finished. She'd been worried about finding the right blue for the sky. The sky. She looked out the window at the real sky, endless and indifferent, beautiful enough to kill you without even trying. "Mommy," Emma whispered, and the word broke something inside her. Her mother was at home, probably making breakfast, thinking her daughter was safe with her experienced pilot father. She had no idea that Emma was alone and falling and so scared. 10,200 feet. A beeping sound started, one of the many alarms her father had taught her to ignore during normal flights. But this wasn't a normal flight. Nothing about this was normal. Emma forced herself to take a breath. Then another. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from a flight 6 months ago when they'd hit bad turbulence. "When things get scary, Em, you can't freeze up. Scared is okay. Frozen is what kills you. Take a breath, think about what you can control, and do the next right thing." What could she control? She was 7. She couldn't land a plane. She couldn't wake up her father. She couldn't make the numbers stop falling. But her eyes landed on the yoke, the control wheel her father held. She'd watched him use it thousands of times. Pull back to go up, push forward to go down. They were going down. That meant the yoke was pushed forward, which meant if she pulled back. 10,100 feet. Emma's small hands wrapped around the yoke. It was cold to the touch, the leather worn smooth from years of use. Her father's hands had held this exact spot. Strong hands, capable hands, hands that were now useless, dead weight against the controls. She pulled. At first, nothing happened. The yoke resisted, heavy with the force of the dive and her father's slumped weight pushing against it. Emma gritted her teeth and pulled harder, using her whole body, feet bracing against the base of the seat. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the yoke moved backward. The airplane responded. The nose began to lift. The artificial horizon symbol shifted. The terrible downward momentum started to ease. 10,050 feet. The numbers were still dropping, but slower now, much slower. Emma kept pulling, her arms burning with the effort. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold cabin. Her small muscles screamed in protest, but she didn't let go, couldn't let go. 10,030 feet. 10,020 feet. 10,015 feet. The altimeter stopped unwinding. For 5 seconds, 5 eternal, beautiful seconds, the number held steady. The airplane had leveled off. Emma had stopped the dive. But her arms were shaking. She couldn't hold this forever, and holding altitude was only buying time. Eventually, something else would happen. Eventually, she'd have to do more than just hold on. The radio headset hung from its hook, swaying slightly with the aircraft's movement. Emma stared at it, remembering all the times she'd listened to her father talk to air traffic control. They were out there somewhere, people on the ground whose job was to help airplanes. But they didn't know she needed help. They didn't know a 7-year-old girl was the only conscious person in an aircraft at 10,015 feet. They didn't know that she was alone. Emma looked at her unconscious father, then at the headset, then at the instrument panel with its bewildering array of dials and switches and lights. She was 7 years old. She liked coloring books and gummy bears and watching her dad fly. She was not supposed to be responsible for keeping 3 people alive. But here, at the edge of the Alaskan wilderness, with mountains rising below and infinity above, supposed to didn't matter anymore. Emma reached for the headset with one hand, keeping the other locked on the yoke. Her next decision would determine whether she lived or died. The clock read 6:58. The headset was too big for Emma's head. That was the first problem. When she pulled it on with her free hand, the other still death-gripping the yoke, the padded ear cup slipped down past her ears, the microphone boom dangling somewhere near her chin instead of her mouth. She pushed it back up, but it immediately slid down again. In any other situation, it would have been comical. Right now, it was just one more obstacle between her and survival. Emma adjusted it as best she could, tilting her head to keep it in place. The foam pressed uncomfortably against her temples, but at least she could hear now. Radio chatter filled her ears, snippets of conversation between pilots and controllers, calm and professional voices discussing headings and altitudes and weather conditions. Normal people having normal conversations about normal flights. She was not normal right now. Her hand hovered over the push-to-talk button on the yoke, a simple red button her father pressed dozens of times every flight. She'd watched him do it so many times she could picture it with her eyes closed. Press the button, speak clearly, release the button, wait for a response. Simple. But what would she say? Help seemed too small for what was happening. We're going to crash felt too big, too final, and saying it out loud might make it real in a way she wasn't ready to accept. Emma's mind raced through possibilities, each one feeling more impossible than the last. What if they didn't believe her? What if they thought it was a prank? Her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Morrison, had told her that emergency services got fake calls all the time from kids playing with phones. What if the people on the radio just hung up, or whatever the radio version of hanging up was? Worse, what if they believed her and asked her to do something she couldn't do? What if they told her to land the plane? She'd watched her father land hundreds of times, but watching wasn't doing. Landing meant finding an airport, lining up with a runway, controlling speed and altitude, and a dozen other things she'd seen but never understood. 10,010 feet. The altimeter had started creeping downward again. Emma's arm was weakening, her grip on the yoke loosening despite her best efforts. Her entire right arm trembled with fatigue, muscles burning like she'd been holding up something impossibly heavy, which she supposed she had. She was holding up an airplane, with one 7-year-old arm. She looked at her father again, desperate for some sign that he was waking up. His eyelids flickered slightly. Or did they? Was that real or just what she wanted to see? Emma reached over with her free hand and grabbed his shoulder, shaking it hard enough to make his head loll. "Dad, please, please wake up, I need you." Her voice broke into a sob. "I don't know what to do." Mark's only response was a soft, rattling breath that sounded wrong, like something inside him wasn't working right. Sarah was the same. Both of them trapped in whatever invisible thing had stolen their consciousness, leaving Emma alone with a choice that no child should ever have to make. 10,005 feet. The decision crystallized in Emma's mind with sudden, terrible clarity. Doing nothing was a choice too. And doing nothing meant dying. All three of them, her dad, Sarah, and her, scattered across some nameless Alaskan mountain, a story on the news that her mom would cry over, another wreck for future pilots to point out as a warning. "No," Emma said aloud, and her voice was stronger than she expected. "Not today." She pressed the red button. Static filled her ears, just white noise and the faint crackle of distance. Emma's throat closed up. What were the words? How did her dad start these conversations? She pressed the button again and forced words out. "Hello, can anybody hear me?" More static. Had she done it wrong? Was the radio broken? Was she? "This is Anchorage Center, go ahead." A male voice, calm and professional, cut through the static like a lifeline. Emma's heart leaped. Someone was there. Someone was listening. But now that she had their attention, the words tangled in her throat. The button. She'd forgotten to hold the button while she was thinking. She pressed it again. My dad, he won't." The sentences fragmented in her mouth, fear chopping them into pieces. "Aircraft calling Anchorage Center, say again. You're coming in broken and distorted." Emma took a breath, trying to channel her father's calm radio voice. But she wasn't calm. She was terrified, so instead she just told the truth. "My name is Emma Chen, and I'm 7 years old, and my daddy is the pilot, and he won't wake up, and neither will Sarah, and I don't know what to do." The words rushed out in a single desperate stream. "The plane is falling, and I'm holding the steering thing, but my arm hurts, and I'm really, really scared." 300 miles away, in the Anchorage Air Traffic Control Center, Senior Controller James Rivera had been mid-sip of his coffee when the transmission came through. He set the cup down so hard it sloshed over the rim. "Say again, aircraft. Did you say you're 7 years old?" His voice remained professionally calm, but his free hand was already slamming the emergency button on his console, alerting every controller in the building. Emma pressed the button with shaking fingers. "Yes, I'm Emma. I'm in my dad's plane and he's asleep and I can't wake him up and I don't know how to fly." Rivera's supervisor, Margaret Chen, no relation, appeared at his shoulder, her face pale. "Is this real?" "Voice stress analysis says yes," another controller called out, fingers flying over a keyboard. "No indication of deception. Background noise consistent with aircraft in flight." Rivera keyed his microphone, his mind racing through 1,000 scenarios, none of them good. A 7-year-old, alone, in flight, pilot incapacitated. This was every controller's nightmare scenario, the kind of situation they trained for but prayed would never happen. "Emma, I'm going to help you," he said, forcing warmth into his professional tone. "You're being very brave. Can you tell me what you see in front of you? Describe anything you can." Emma looked at the instrument panel through tear-blurred eyes. "There's lots of round things with numbers and needles, and some of them are moving and some aren't, and there's a little airplane in a circle and it's tilted, and—" she paused, trying to remember what her father called things. "And there's a thing that says 10,005. "That's your altitude," Rivera said. "That's very good, Emma. You're doing great. Is that number going up or down?" Emma watched it for a moment. "Down, it's going down." Okay, that's okay." Rivera's mind was already calculating. Rate of descent, time until impact, fuel state, aircraft type. He needed more information, but he also needed to keep this little girl calm. "Emma, I need you to do something for me. Can you see a red button near the steering wheel?" "I'm already pressing it. That's how I'm talking to you." "Perfect, you're doing perfect." Rivera allowed himself the ghost of a smile despite the situation. "Smart kid. Now I'm going to ask you some questions and I want you to answer them as best you can. Don't worry if you don't know something. Just tell me what you see. Can you do that?" "Okay." Emma's voice was small, frightened, but there was determination there too. "Good girl. Now, is the airplane shaking at all? Does it feel bouncy?" "No, it's smooth. But my arm really hurts from holding the wheel thing." Rivera closed his eyes briefly. She was hand-flying the aircraft. A 7-year-old was manually controlling an airplane at 10,000 feet with an unconscious pilot slumped over the controls. The statistical improbability of survival was something he couldn't think about right now. "Emma, I know your arm hurts, but I need you to keep holding that wheel, okay? Can you do that for me? Can you be brave for just a little bit longer?" Through the radio, he heard a sound that broke his heart, a child's sob quickly stifled. "I'm trying," Emma whispered. "I'm trying really hard." "I know you are, sweetheart. I know you are." Rivera looked up at the circle of controllers now surrounding his station. Someone had already contacted the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center. Someone else was pulling up a list of every pilot in the Anchorage area who might be able to provide guidance. But in that moment, Emma Chen had only one guardian angel, a 52-year-old air traffic controller who had been doing this job for 27 years and had never felt more inadequate in his life. "Emma," he said gently, "I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to be right here with you until we get you safely on the ground. I promise. You're not alone anymore." "Okay," a pause. Then in a voice so small he almost missed it, "Thank you." The clock read 6:59 a.m. Emma Chen's impossible journey had just begun. James Rivera's hands moved across his console with practiced efficiency, but his mind was anything but calm. In 27 years of air traffic control, he talked pilots through engine failures, guided aircraft with blown tires to safe landings, coordinated emergency responses for medical emergencies at 35,000 feet. But he'd never had a 7-year-old alone in a cockpit. "Emma, I need you to stay with me," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm going to ask you more questions. First, can you tell me what kind of airplane you're in?" Static crackled, then Emma's small voice. "It's, a Cessna. I think it's a 207. That's what Dad calls it." Rivera's fingers flew over his keyboard, pulling up specifications. Cessna 207. Single engine. 6 seats. Cruise speed around 140 knots. He needed to know their position, fuel state, and most critically, what had incapacitated both pilots. "That's excellent, Emma. You're very smart. Now, can you see any mountains out the window?" "Yes, they're really big, and they're getting closer." The fear in her voice was palpable. Rivera's supervisor, Margaret, leaned over his shoulder. "We need an expert, someone who knows that aircraft inside and out." "Already on it," called out Controller David Park from across the room. "I've got the FAA on line 2, and I'm reaching out to every flight instructor in the state." Rivera keyed his mic again. "Emma, those mountains are far away than they look, I promise. You're doing great. Now I need you to tell me, can you see a compass? It's a round thing that might have the letter N or S or E or W on it." There's numbers, 330. "Perfect, that's your heading. You're flying nor-northwest." Rivera scribbled notes on a pad. "Emma, this is very important. Do you know where you were going today? Where was your dad flying to?" "The research station, the one with the scientists who study bears. Dad goes there a lot." Margaret was already cross-referencing flight plans. "Got it. Cessna 27 Bravo Charlie filed for Driftwood Research Station. Departed Anchorage at 0642. That puts them." She traced a line on the map, approximately here, about 40 minutes from Anchorage, heading into the Alaska Range. Rivera felt his stomach tighten. The Alaska Range, some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America, if Emma couldn't maintain altitude, if her father didn't wake up soon. "Emma, I need to ask you about your dad and Sarah. Are their eyes closed? Are they breathing?" A pause. He could hear Emma's shaky breaths over the radio. "Their eyes are closed, and Dad is breathing, but it sounds weird, kind of. Rattle, why? And his lips are blue, like really blue. Is he dying?" The last word came out as a whisper. Blue lips, irregular breathing, loss of consciousness at altitude. Rivera's mind raced. Carbon monoxide poisoning. No, that usually affected everyone equally. Decompression. Possible, but the aircraft wasn't pressurized at this altitude anyway. Then it hit him, hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. Margaret, get me someone medical, now. A new voice cut into Rivera's headset, deep, authoritative, female. Rivera, this is Colonel Patricia Hayes. I was doing a tower tour when I heard the call. Put me on with her. Rivera had heard of Colonel Hayes. Everyone in Anchorage aviation circles had. Retired Air Force, 30 years of flying everything from cargo planes to fighters. Currently ran a flight school. If anyone could talk a child through this, it was her. Colonel, she's all yours. Switching you to the primary frequency. Emma heard the change in her headset. A slight click, then a new voice. Warmer than the man's, confident in a way that reminded her of her grandmother. Emma, my name is Patricia Hayes, but you can call me Patricia. I used to fly planes for the Air Force, and now I teach people how to fly. I'm going to help you bring your dad home safe. Can you do something for me? Emma's arm was shaking violently now, the yoke wobbling under her weakening grip. I'm trying, but my arm really hurts. I know, sweetheart, I know it does, but I need you to be strong for just a little longer. Can you use both hands? Put both hands on the wheel. Emma looked at her left hand, the one she'd been using to key the radio. If she put both hands on the yoke, she couldn't talk. But if she didn't use both hands, she was going to drop the plane. If I use both hands, I can't press the button to talk to you. That's okay, Patricia said calmly. Here's what we're going to do. You use both hands to hold that wheel steady. When you need to talk to me, take one hand off, press the button, say what you need to say, then put your hand right back on. Like taking turns. Can you do that? Emma gripped the yoke with both hands. Immediately the strain on her right arm eased. The plane steadied. Okay, that's better. 9,995 feet. They were still descending, but slower now, much slower. Patricia continued, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. Good girl. Now, Emma, I need you to listen very carefully. Your dad and Sarah are experiencing something called hypoxia. Do you know what that means? Emma shook her head, then remembered Patricia couldn't see her. She took one hand off the yoke and pressed the button. No. It means they're not getting enough oxygen. Like when you hold your breath for too long and feel dizzy. It's like that, but their bodies are doing it automatically because the air is too thin up where you are. How do I fix it? Emma's voice cracked with desperate hope. Patricia exchanged glances with Rivera, who was still monitoring from his station. This was the critical moment. What she said next would determine everything. Emma, the good news is that if we can get you lower, closer to the ground where the air is thicker, your dad and Sarah should wake up. The air down low has more oxygen, but getting lower means you need to very gently, very slowly, push the wheel forward just a tiny bit. Just a little tiny push. But that makes us go down, Emma protested. The plane was going down before and it was bad. You're absolutely right, Patricia said. But before, you weren't in control. The plane was diving. What I need you to do is different. It's called a controlled descent. You're going to tell the plane to go down slowly, not let it fall. Like walking down stairs instead of falling down them. Do you understand? Emma stared at the yoke, terrified. Every instinct screamed at her to keep pulling back, to keep the nose up, to stay as far from the ground as possible. But she trusted this voice, this Patricia. She sounded like someone who knew things. Okay, Emma whispered, how much do I push? Just a tiny, tiny bit, like pushing a button on a remote control, not hard, gentle. Emma took a breath and pushed, just barely. The nose dipped slightly and her stomach lurched. 9,990 feet, 9,985 feet, 9,980 feet. I'm doing it. She pressed the button with one hand, excitement and terror mixing in her voice. The numbers are going down. Perfect, you're doing perfect. Patricia's voice was full of genuine pride. Now, here's the important part. See that little round thing that looks like a half circle, with a tiny airplane inside it? Emma found it, the artificial horizon. Yes. The little airplane needs to be just barely below the middle line, just a tiny bit. Can you see if it is? Emma squinted at the instrument. The tiny airplane symbol was tilted, nose down more than just a tiny bit. It's too low. The nose is too far down. Okay, then pull back just a tiny bit. Make the little airplane almost level but still just a little bit nose down. Emma adjusted, her tongue poking out in concentration, the same face she made during difficult math problems. The artificial horizon shifted. The tiny airplane leveled out slightly. 9,970 feet, 9,965 feet, 9,960 feet. The descent continued but controlled now. Stable. Emma Chen, 7 years old, was flying an airplane. In the control tower, a room full of aviation professionals watched the radar blip in stunned silence. David Park broke it with a whisper. She's actually doing it. Patricia's voice remained calm. Emma, you're doing wonderfully. Keep that descent nice and steady. We're going to bring you down to about 8,000 feet. At that altitude, your dad should start waking up. The thicker air will help him breathe better. How long will that take? Patricia did quick mental math. Current altitude 9,960, descending at roughly 200 feet per minute, target altitude 8,000. About 10 minutes, sweetheart. Can you hold on for 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Emma's arms already felt like they were made of jelly. Her hands were cramping. But she thought about her dad, about those terrible blue lips, about that awful rattling breathing. I can do 10 minutes, she said and meant it. The clock read 7:02 a.m. In the Alaskan wilderness below, mountains waited, indifferent, eternal, deadly. And above them, a little girl held 3 lives in her shaking hands, 9,800 feet. Emma's world had narrowed to 3 things: the yoke in her hands, Patricia's voice in her ears, and the altimeter unwinding with agonizing slowness. Every muscle in her small body screamed in protest. Her shoulders burned. Her forearms felt like they'd been filled with hot sand. Even her fingers ached from gripping the yoke so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. You're doing beautifully, Emma. Patricia's voice came through the headset, steady as a heartbeat. How are you feeling? Emma wanted to say she was fine, the way she always did when adults asked. But she was so tired of pretending, so tired of being brave. My hands hurt, she admitted, her voice small, and I'm scared. Being scared is okay, Patricia said. You know what scared means. It means you understand the situation, that you're smart. Some of the bravest pilots I ever flew with were scared sometimes. The trick is doing the job anyway. 9,650 feet. In the control tower, Patricia stood surrounded by a semicircle of controllers, all monitoring Emma's progress. On the main screen, the radar blip representing Cessna 27 Bravo Charlie crept across the display, a tiny green dot carrying an impossible burden. James Rivera had patched in Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, a flight surgeon from the FAA Medical Division. She'd confirmed Patricia's assessment: hypoxia from pressurization failure. The treatment was simple: get them to lower altitude where oxygen was abundant. But simple didn't mean easy, not when a 7-year-old was the one flying. Altitude check, Emma, Patricia prompted. Emma took one hand off the yoke. It was getting easier now, the motion becoming familiar, and pressed the button. 9,645. Perfect. You're doing exactly what you need to do. Now I want you to look outside. Tell me what you see. Emma glanced out the windscreen. The mountains were still there, massive and white and terrifying, but they weren't getting bigger anymore. The descent was so gradual that the landscape seemed almost stable. Mountains and sky, and, is that a bird? Patricia smiled despite the tension. A child's mind, even in crisis, could find wonder. Probably an eagle. They fly pretty high up there. Emma, I need you to check on your dad again. Don't let go of the controls, but can you look at him? Emma turned her head. Mark was still slumped forward, but was that different? She stared at his face, willing herself to see change. His color was still wrong, still that grayish blue that made her stomach hurt to look at. But maybe, possibly, was there a little more color in his cheeks? He looks the same, she reported, disappointment heavy in her voice. Still sleeping. That's okay. We're at 9,600 feet now. We need to get down to 8,000 before he'll start to wake up. You're almost a quarter of the way there. Almost a quarter. Emma's heart sank. That meant 3 more quarters to go. 3 more segments of this endless, terrifying descent. Her arms trembled violently now, the shaking making the yoke wobble. Patricia, she pressed the button. What if I can't hold on that long? The question hung in the air, raw and honest. In the tower, every person stopped breathing. Patricia chose her words carefully. Emma, I'm going to tell you something true. What you're doing right now, most adults couldn't do it. Most trained pilots would be panicking, but you're not panicking. You're thinking. You're listening, you're being strong, and I absolutely know that you have enough strength to finish this. Do you know why? Why? Because you're your father's daughter, and your father is a pilot. That means you've got flying in your blood. It means you're tougher than you think. Emma felt something shift inside her chest. Not the fear leaving, that was still there, cold and heavy, but something else joining it. A tiny spark of something that might have been pride. 9,400 feet. Patricia, Emma's voice was steadier now. Can you tell me what to do if something else goes wrong? Like if the engine stops or something? Rivera's eyes widened. The kid was thinking ahead, planning for contingencies. She was 7 years old and thinking like a pilot. Patricia kept her voice calm. The engine sounds good and strong, Emma. I can hear it through your radio. It's not going to stop. But I'm going to teach you something just in case, okay? See that thing that looks like a clock with a picture of a propeller on it? Emma scanned the panel. The one with the green and red parts. That's the one. That's your tachometer. It tells you how fast the engine is running. Right now, what number is the needle pointing to? 23, and it says 100 next to it. Perfect. 2,300 RPM. As long as that needle stays in the green part, your engine is happy. If it drops into the red, that's when we'd have a problem. But it's not going to. That engine has been running smooth this whole time. 9,200 feet. Emma studied the tachometer, memorizing its face. Knowledge felt like armor against the fear. Every instrument Patricia taught her about was one less mystery, one less unknown threat. What about that one? Emma pointed, then remembered Patricia couldn't see her. The one that says fuel with an E and an F. Good eye, that's your fuel gauge. What's it showing? The needle is between the F and the middle. Excellent, that means you have plenty of fuel, plenty of time. Patricia paused, then added gently, Emma, I want you to know something. There are emergency crews getting ready at the Anchorage airport right now. Fire trucks, ambulances, the works. When we get you down, they're going to take care of your dad and Sarah immediately. They're going to be okay. How do you know? Emma's voice cracked. How do you know they're going to be okay? Because hypoxia is reversible. Once they get oxygen-rich air again, their brains will start working normally. They'll wake up confused and maybe with a headache, but they'll wake up. Your dad is going to wake up, Emma. I promise you. Patricia had no business making promises about medical outcomes. But sometimes, she knew, a child needed certainty more than honesty. 9,000 feet. I'm at 9,000. Emma's voice carried a hint of excitement. That's only 1,000 more to 8,000. That's right, you're so close, sweetheart. Just keep doing exactly what you're doing. Nice and steady. Emma's arms had gone past pain into a strange numbness. She discovered that if she locked her elbows and leaned back slightly, she could use her body weight to help hold the yoke. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. 8,800 feet. Outside the window, the mountains were closer now but less threatening somehow. Or maybe Emma was just too tired to be more afraid. Fear, she was discovering, was exhausting. You could only maintain peak terror for so long before it became just background noise. 8,600 feet. Emma, I need you to check your dad again, Patricia said. Emma looked at Mark. His head was still against the panel, his body still limp. But wait. His fingers, the fingers of his right hand. They'd been completely still before, slack and lifeless. Now they were twitching, just barely, just the tiniest movement. His fingers moved, Emma shouted, forgetting to press the button in her excitement. She pressed it again. Patricia, his fingers moved, I saw them. In the control tower, a cheer erupted. People who'd been holding their breath for the last 12 minutes released it in a collective exhale of hope. That's wonderful, Emma. That means the oxygen is starting to work. Keep descending, nice and steady. We're almost there. 8,400 feet. Mark Chen's brain, starved of oxygen for nearly 15 minutes, began to resurface from the depths of hypoxia-induced unconsciousness. Neurons fired sluggishly, synapses reconnecting like lights flickering on in a dark house. Somewhere far away, he could hear voices. A child's voice. His child's voice. Emma. 8,200 feet. Mark's eyelids fluttered just once, but it was enough. Dad, Emma whispered, not bothering with the radio. Daddy, please wake up, please. 8,000 feet. Mark Chen's eyes opened. The world came back to Mark Chen in fragments. First sound, a steady drone that he knew but couldn't place. Then sensation, cold plastic pressed against his forehead, a seatbelt cutting across his chest. Then confusion, why was he leaning forward? Why did his head hurt like someone had stuffed it with broken glass? Then terrifyingly a child's voice, Daddy, Daddy, please wake up. His eyes opened to a blur of instruments and sky. His mouth tasted like copper. His thoughts moved like honey, thick and slow. Where was he? What was happening? Why couldn't he remember the last? How long had it been? Minutes, hours. Daddy, the word came with a sob, and suddenly Emma's small face was beside his, tears streaming down her cheeks, her eyes red and swollen. Emma, his daughter, in the plane. They'd been flying, they'd been. Memory crashed back in pieces. The flight to Driftwood Station, Sarah in the co-pilot seat, climbing through 11,000 feet, feeling strange, feeling wrong. Then, nothing, a blank space where time should be. Emma, his voice came out as a croak, his throat raw. What happened? You fell asleep, Emma's words tumbled out in a rush. You and Sarah both fell asleep and wouldn't wake up, and the plane was falling and I had to fly it, and Patricia talked to me and told me what to do, and I've been holding the wheel for so long and my arms hurt so much and I was so scared, Daddy. I was so scared. Mark's pilot brain struggled to process this through the fog. Emma flew? Impossible. She was 7. But even as he thought it, he saw her hands on the yoke, white-knuckled and shaking. Saw the altimeter reading 8,000 feet when they should have been at 11,000. Saw his own hands hanging uselessly in his lap. A voice crackled through his headset. When had he started hearing that? Mr. Chen, this is Colonel Patricia Hayes with Anchorage ATC. You've experienced hypoxia due to what we believe is a pressurization system failure. Your daughter has been hand-flying the aircraft for the last 17 minutes under our guidance. We need you to take control immediately, but move slowly. You may still be disoriented. 17 minutes. The number didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. His 7-year-old daughter had been flying his airplane for 17 minutes. Mark tried to form words to make his brain work properly. His hands felt distant, disconnected. He tried to grip the yoke, but his fingers wouldn't coordinate. I can't. I'm not. Daddy, you have to. Emma's voice pitched higher with fresh panic. I can't hold it anymore. My arms are shaking really bad. Mark could see it, the violent tremor in her small arms, the tears still streaming down her face, the exhaustion carved into her features. His baby girl pushed so far beyond what any child should endure. Something hardened in him. The fog didn't clear. The hypoxia still had its claws in his brain, but discipline cut through it. Years of training, years of emergencies practiced and procedures memorized. His daughter needed him. That was all that mattered. "Okay, princess," he managed, his tongue still thick in his mouth. "Okay, I've got it, let go." "Are you sure?" Emma's hands stayed locked on the yoke, even though they shook like leaves in a storm. "I'm sure I've got the aircraft. You can let go now." Emma's hands released, and she immediately collapsed backward into her jump seat, her arms falling limply to her sides. She'd held on for so long that her muscles had forgotten how to relax. She stared at her hands, red, cramped, still curved as if gripping something, and started crying in earnest. Not the panicked tears of fear, but the exhausted tears of release. Mark took the controls, fighting to keep his own hand steady. The airplane felt strange, disconnected. His depth perception was off, his reactions delayed. He was flying drunk, essentially, though no alcohol had touched his lips. Hypoxia affected the brain the same way, impaired judgment, slowed reactions, compromised motor skills. A groan came from his right, Sarah. Her head lifted slowly, eyes blinking open in confusion. "What? Where?" She looked around the cockpit like she'd never seen it before. "Mark, what's happening? I feel like I've been hit by a truck." "Hypoxia," Mark said, each word requiring concentration. "Pressurization failure. We both blacked out." "For how long?" 17 minutes. The number still seemed impossible. Sarah's eyes went wide. 17, who was flying? Who? She turned and saw Emma, saw the tears and the shaking hands and the way the little girl was curled into herself. "Oh my God, Emma, did you?" "She saved our lives," Mark said quietly. Patricia's voice came through again, crisp and professional. "Mr. Chen, we need to get you on the ground as soon as possible. Both you and your co-pilot need medical evaluation. Can you handle the aircraft?" Mark assessed himself honestly. His vision was clearing, but slowly. His hands were steadier than they'd been a minute ago, but not steady enough. His thought process was improving, but he was still operating at maybe 70% capacity. "I can fly it," he said. "Landing might be challenging. Anchorage International is ready for you. We've cleared the main runway. Fire and rescue are standing by. Weather is clear, winds light. You'll have every advantage we can give you." Mark checked their position on the GPS. They were 40 minutes from Anchorage. 40 minutes to get his brain fully functional again. 40 minutes with his daughter watching him, trusting him to finish what she'd started. "Copy that, Anchorage. Cessna 27 Bravo Charlie is returning to field." Sarah ran through instrument checks, her own movements still sluggish. "All systems showing normal except pressurization. We're getting adequate ventilation from outside air at this altitude. 8,000 feet, low enough for oxygen, high enough to clear the mountains." Emma had threaded that needle perfectly. Mark turned in his seat to look at his daughter. She was staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else, her face pale, her breathing rapid and shallow. The adrenaline that had kept her going was crashing now, leaving her trembling and small. "Emma," he said softly, "come here, princess." She unbuckled and stumbled forward, and Mark wrapped his free arm around her, pulling her close. She buried her face in his shoulder and shook with silent sobs. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "You saved us. You saved all three of us. Do you understand that? You're a hero." "I was so scared," she whimpered. "I didn't know what to do, and you wouldn't wake up, and I thought you were going to die, and I didn't want you to die, Daddy." I know, baby, but you didn't freeze. You did something. You made the right choices." He tightened his arm around her. "I'm so proud of you, so incredibly proud." Sarah reached back and squeezed Emma's hand. "You're braver than most adults I know, kiddo, including me." Patricia's voice returned, gentler now. "Emma, can you hear me, sweetheart?" Emma lifted her head slightly. "Yes." "You did wonderfully, absolutely wonderfully. Your father is right, you're a hero, but I need you to do one more thing for me, okay? I need you to sit back down and buckle up. Your dad needs space to fly now. Can you do that?" Emma nodded against Mark's shoulder, then reluctantly pulled away. Her legs were unsteady as she made her way back to the jump seat. She buckled in with trembling fingers, then wrapped her arms around herself. Mark adjusted their heading, pointing the Cessna toward Anchorage. The late morning sun glinted off glaciers below, the same beautiful landscape that had seemed so peaceful an hour ago. Now it looked different, fragile, temporary, precious. "Anchorage Center, 27 Bravo Charlie," Mark transmitted. "We're stable and en route. Request medical standing by on arrival." "Roger that. Medical is ready. We'll also have NTSB investigators and FAA safety inspectors, but they'll wait until after you're checked out. Your only job is to bring that bird home safe." "Copy." 40 minutes. Mark focused on flying, on keeping the wings level and the nose pointed true. Beside him, Sarah monitored instruments with improving clarity. Behind him, his daughter sat wrapped in a blanket someone had thought to pack, her eyes distant, processing trauma no child should carry. The worst was over. They were conscious, controlled, heading home. But Mark Chen knew this was far from finished. The physical danger might be passing, but Emma would carry this day with her forever. The terror, the responsibility, the impossible burden of 3 lives in her small hands. He'd put her there. His airplane, his decision to bring her along, his failure to catch the pressurization malfunction. The guilt was crushing. But right now he had to fly. Guilt could wait. The mountains gave way to foothills. The foothills gave way to coastal plains. Anchorage appeared on the horizon. The clock read 7:34 a.m. Almost home. The Anchorage International Airport Control Tower had never been so quiet. Every controller stood frozen, eyes locked on the radar display showing the small green blip of Cessna 27 Bravo Charlie on final approach. The emergency vehicles lined the runway, 3 fire trucks, 2 ambulances, an airport operations truck, and a collection of police cars whose officers had simply wanted to be there, to witness this impossible landing. Patricia Hayes stood at the window, binoculars pressed to her eyes, scanning the southern sky. Beside her, James Rivera held his headset so tightly his knuckles were white. 27 Bravo Charlie, you're 5 miles out, Rivera transmitted, his voice professionally calm despite the churning in his gut. Runway 32 is yours. Wind is light and variable. You're cleared to land. Roger, cleared to land 32, Mark responded. His voice was stronger now, more like himself, but still carried an edge of fatigue that worried everyone listening. Through the binoculars, Patricia spotted them, a tiny speck against the mountains, growing slowly larger. The Cessna looked so small, so fragile. Inside that aluminum tube was a man still recovering from oxygen deprivation, trying to land an aircraft with compromised cognitive function, and a 7-year-old girl who just lived through every parent's nightmare. "I see them," Patricia murmured. The radio crackled. "Anchorage, 27 Bravo Charlie has the field in sight." "Roger, continue approach. You're looking good." Inside the Cessna, Mark's hands gripped the yoke with forced steadiness. His head still pounded, and occasionally his vision would blur at the edges, but he was functional, mostly functional. Sarah called out altitudes and airspeeds, her own recovery slightly ahead of his. 1,000 feet, speed is 70 knots, on glide path. "Copy." Mark adjusted power, feeling the airplane respond. It felt heavy, sluggish, or maybe that was just his oxygen-starved muscles. He couldn't trust his own perceptions right now. Behind them, Emma sat perfectly still, staring out the window without really seeing. She'd stopped crying 20 minutes ago. Now she just felt empty, hollowed out, like she'd used up every emotion she had and there was nothing left. Her hands still trembled in her lap. She doubted they'd ever stop. 500 feet, Sarah called. Looking good, Mark, you've got this. The runway rose to meet them, that familiar rectangle of asphalt that Mark had landed on hundreds of times. But nothing felt familiar right now. Everything felt strange and distant, like he was watching someone else fly. 200 feet, 50, 40, 30. The wheels kissed the runway with barely a bump. Mark had made rougher landings on his best days. Muscle memory and 20,000 hours of flying had taken over when his conscious mind couldn't quite manage. The Cessna rolled down the center line, slowing, finally coming to rest as Mark applied the brakes. He sat there for a moment, hands still on the controls, unable to quite believe it was over. 27 Bravo Charlie is on the ground, he transmitted, and his voice cracked on the last word. The control tower erupted in cheers. Patricia found herself crying, something she hadn't done since her retirement ceremony. Rivera was grinning so wide his face hurt. Every controller, every supervisor, every person who'd witnessed this impossible flight let out the breath they'd been holding for the last hour. Emergency vehicles swarmed the Cessna before Mark could even shut down the engine. Paramedics yanked open the door, professional urgency tempered with gentle hands. "Sir, we need you to stay seated while we check you out," a young EMT said, already fitting an oxygen mask over Mark's face. "My daughter," Mark protested, trying to look back. "Emma." "We've got her, sir. We've got all of you." Another paramedic had climbed into the back, kneeling beside Emma's jump seat. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name's Jennifer. Can you tell me your name?" Emma looked at her with dull eyes. "Emma Chen, I'm 7, I flew the plane." "I know you did, honey. Everyone knows you're amazing." Jennifer wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Emma's thin arm. "Does anything hurt?" "My arms, my hands, everything." "Okay, we're going to take good care of you." Sarah was already being helped out of the co-pilot seat, accepting oxygen and a supporting arm from a firefighter twice her size. She looked back at Emma as they led her away. "You take care of that girl," she told the paramedics. "She's special." Mark was being transferred to a stretcher despite his protests. "I can walk. I need to see my daughter." "Sir, you experienced severe hypoxia. You need oxygen and observation. Your daughter is right behind you. You'll see her in the ambulance." They carried him out into the bright Alaskan morning, and that's when Mark saw the crowd. At least 50 airport personnel lined the tarmac, ground crew, pilots, TSA agents, janitors, shop workers. As the stretcher passed, they began to applaud. Mark closed his eyes against sudden tears. Emma emerged moments later, wrapped in a blanket despite the paramedics' objections that they needed to examine her. She clutched it around herself like armor, blinking in the sunlight. The applause grew louder. Someone shouted, "Way to go, little hero." Emma didn't feel like a hero. She felt small and tired and wanted her mother. As if summoned by the thought, a car came screeching around the corner of the terminal building, tires squealing. It barely stopped before a woman threw open the door and ran toward them. "Emma!" "Mom!" The word tore out of Emma's throat, and suddenly she was running too, the blanket falling away, her exhausted legs pumping across the tarmac. Linda Chen dropped to her knees and caught her daughter in a crushing embrace, both of them sobbing. "Baby, oh baby, my baby, you're okay, you're okay." "Mom, I was so scared. Dad wouldn't wake up and I didn't know what to do and—" "SHH, I know, but you're safe now, you're safe." Linda looked up at the paramedic. "Is she hurt?" "Physically, she appears fine. Muscle strain in her arms, possible mild shock. We want to take her in for observation." "I'm coming with her." "Ma'am." "I'm coming with her." Linda's voice left no room for argument. The paramedic nodded. "Of course." They loaded Emma into the same ambulance as Mark. Mother and daughter sat together on the bench seat while Mark lay on the stretcher, oxygen mask fogging with each breath. His eyes met Linda's over Emma's head, and in that look passed everything that couldn't be said. His guilt, her terror, their shared relief, their love for this incredible little girl. Linda mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Mark shook his head. He'd done nothing. Emma had done everything. The ambulance doors closed and they pulled away, sirens silent but lights flashing. The hospital kept all 3 of them overnight. Mark and Sarah were treated for severe hypoxia, supplemental oxygen, IV fluids, neurological assessments. Both would make full recoveries, though Mark would struggle with headaches for weeks. Emma's physical examination showed exactly what the paramedics had found: muscle strain, dehydration, elevated heart rate consistent with extreme stress. But the pediatrician called in a child psychologist who sat with Emma for an hour, talking gently about what had happened. "It's okay to be scared," Dr. Rachel Morrison said. "What you went through was terrifying. A lot of kids, a lot of adults, would have nightmares about something like that." "I already had a nightmare," Emma said quietly. "I fell asleep in the hospital and dreamed I was still in the plane and Dad never woke up and we crashed." "That sounds frightening." "It was." Emma picked at the hospital blanket. "Dr. Morrison, am I broken now?" "Broken? What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Like, will I always be scared? Will I always have bad dreams?" Dr. Morrison chose her words carefully. "You went through something traumatic. That means your brain is trying to process a really big, scary event. You might have nightmares for a while. You might feel anxious when you think about flying. Those are normal responses to an abnormal situation. But broken? No, Emma, you're not broken, you're healing. And healing takes time." The media found them within hours. By evening, every news station in Alaska was running the story. By the next morning, it had gone national. 7-year-old girl saves father's life in miracle flight. Child pilot lands plane after crew blacks out. Young heroes, incredible sky-high rescue. Emma's school principal called to say the entire 2nd grade had made her welcome home cards. The governor's office sent flowers. Anthropic received requests for interviews from Good Morning America, The Today Show, CNN, Fox News, and a dozen others. Mark refused them all. "She's 7, he told the reporters camped outside their house. "She's been through enough, leave her alone." But he couldn't stop the FAA investigation, couldn't stop the NTSB examination of the aircraft, which revealed a failed cabin pressurization valve, a $200 part that should have been replaced during the last annual inspection. The mechanic who'd signed off on the inspection was suspended. The maintenance facility faced fines. Mark faced his own reckoning. "I should have caught it," he told Linda one night, 3 weeks after the incident, sitting in Emma's darkened doorway watching their daughter sleep. "I should have noticed something was off. I should have never put her at risk." "You didn't know," Linda said softly. "That's not an excuse. I'm the pilot. It's my job to know." Linda was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you going to stop flying?" The question hung in the air. Mark had been asking himself the same thing. Every time he thought about getting back in an airplane, he saw Emma's terrified face, heard her voice on the radio. "I'm really, really scared." "I don't know," he admitted. 6 weeks after the incident, Colonel Patricia Hayes arrived at the Chen house with a package. Emma answered the door, recognizing the voice she'd heard through the darkest moment of her life. "Hi, Emma," Patricia said with a warm smile. "Do you remember me?" "You're Patricia, you helped me fly." "That's right, may I come in?" They sat in the living room and Patricia pulled a wooden box from her bag. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was a pair of pilot's wings, real ones, gold and gleaming. "These are for you," Patricia said. "They were my wings from my first day in the Air Force. I've carried them through 30 years of flying, and now I want you to have them." Emma stared at the wings but didn't touch them. "Why?" "Because you earned them. You did something most pilots never have to do. You faced the impossible and you didn't quit. That makes you a pilot in my book. Maybe you're not old enough to have a license, but you've got something more important. You've got courage." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I don't feel brave. I have nightmares. I'm scared to go in airplanes now. Dad wants to take me flying again and I don't want to go." Courage isn't the absence of fear, Emma. It's doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. You were scared up there, weren't you? So scared. But you didn't give up. That's what makes you brave. Patricia paused. "It's okay to be afraid now. It's okay to not want to fly. You don't have to be brave every day. Sometimes healing means letting yourself be scared." 3 months after the incident, Mark made a decision. He quit his charter service. Not because he was afraid to fly, though he was, but because he couldn't shake the image of Emma's small hands on the yoke, couldn't stop hearing her voice. "I don't want to die." He took a job as a flight instructor at Patricia's school, teaching from the ground, rebuilding his relationship with aviation on new terms. Emma went back to being a second grader. Her classmates called her hero girl for a few weeks, then moved on to other things. Her nightmares came less frequently. Dr. Morrison helped her develop coping strategies. Linda held her when the bad dreams came. And 6 months to the day after the incident, Mark sat Emma down at the kitchen table. "Princess, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. No brave faces, no telling me what you think I want to hear. Okay?" "Okay," Emma said cautiously. "Do you ever want to fly again?" Emma was quiet for a long time. She thought about the fear, the nightmares, the way her hands still sometimes shook when she thought about that day. But she also thought about something else. The feeling of the yoke in her hands, the way the airplane had responded to her touch, the moment she'd realized she could do something impossible. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe someday, not now, but maybe someday." Mark smiled and pulled something from his pocket. A pilot's cap, child-sized, with Patricia's wings pinned to the front. "Then when someday comes, you let me know, and we'll fly together, but only when you're ready. No pressure, no expectations, just, if you want to." Emma took the cap, running her fingers over the golden wings. They caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, the same light that had illuminated her father's cockpit on that impossible morning. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm really glad you're okay." "Me too, Princess, me too." The end.